this is a test of the emergency broadcast system. No. This morning, while I was thinking of what to say that would be timely, on the one hand, wouldn't make me cry on the other, since the first anniversary of Joyce's death is Friday, I happened to think of a fairly obscure story. This is in 2 Kings 20, at the start of the chapter, if anybody has a copy and wants to follow along. The setup is Hezekiah is the king of Judah. He has tried to do what was right in the eyes of God, except he also had this yen to break free from his overlords, the kings of Assyria, who were sort of, well, if any of you are old, well, those of us who are old enough to remember Solidarity in Poland, 1981, that situation. So the start of chapter 20. In those days, Hezekiah was sick unto death. The prophet Isaiah, son of Amos, came and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, set your affairs in order, for you are going to die. You will not recover." Thereupon Hezekiah turned his face to the wall and prayed to the Lord and said, "Please, O Lord, remember how I have walked before you sincerely and wholeheartedly and have done what is pleasing to you." And Hezekiah wept bitterly. Before Isaiah had gone out of the middle court of the house of the king, the word of the Lord came to him. "Go back and say to Hezekiah, the prince of my people, thus says the Lord, the God of your father David, I have heard your prayer. I have seen your tears. I am going to heal you. On the third day you shall go up to the house of the Lord, and I will add 15 years to your life. I will also rescue you and this city from the hands of the king of Assyria. I will protect this city for my sake and for the sake of my servant David." And then Isaiah said, "Get a cake of figs." They got one, and they applied it to the boil, and he, that is the king, recovered. Hezekiah asked Isaiah, "What is the sign that the Lord will heal me, and that I shall go up to the house of the Lord on the third day?" Isaiah replied, "This is the sign for you from the Lord, that the Lord will do the thing that he has promised. Shall the shadow advance 10 steps or recede 10 steps?" What they're talking about here is a type of sundial that is attested elsewhere, where basically you had the gnomon, which is the part that sticks up on a regular sundial, as a stick or a post, either protruding from the wall of a building with a set of stairs going up, or you had the gnomon at the top, and the shadow would go up and down each step of them. Hezekiah said, "It is easy for the shadow to lengthen 10 steps, but not for the shadow to recede 10 steps. So basically the shadow backs up 10 steps. So the prophet Isaiah called to the Lord, and he made the shadow which had descended on the steps of Ahaz recede 10 steps. And you're probably thinking, Lord have mercy, what does all this have to do with the price of eggs in China, David? Or the price of tea in China? But if you think about it, especially in this past year, pretty much all of us have gone through the experience of hearing a terminal diagnosis on a loved one. And apparently Isaiah was also something of a healer as well as a preacher, a teacher, the scourge of kings, the conscience of the nation at the time. And so he takes one look at Hezekiah, and he passes on the word that he's gotten from the Lord, which is, set your affairs in order, this is going to be it. And Hezekiah weeps and he prays, and before Isaiah has a chance to get away from the king's house, he's given another word saying, turn around, go back and tell him he will recover. Okay? And then he tells the servants who are always scurrying around whenever royalty is involved, go get a cake of figs. So they got it, and they apply it as a poultice to whatever sort of boil he had. I actually looked this up. What it sounds like, apparently, is that Hezekiah might have had a case of cutaneous anthrax, and the use of a fig poultice for that type of anthrax is the least worrisome type of anthrax. I mean, it can still kill you, but it's also the most easily treated, apparently. And it presents as a boil or a rash on the skin. And the use of a fig poultice on that to draw the boil to a head goes back at least 2,000 years before this. If any of you have ever heard of the Ebla tablets that made a splash back in the 70s when they were first discovered, they go back to to around 25 to 2800 BC or BCE, if you're being more cognizant of our Jewish brothers and sisters. Well, in the Ebla tablets, they would put a fig poultice on horses that came down with cutaneous anthrax, apparently. And there does seem to be some evidence that the fig has mild anti-inflammatory and antiseptic properties. Then we get to this business about the sundial. And that's what really caught my attention. I don't know how many of you have seen, either in printed books, in newspaper articles, or in that fount of all wisdom, the internet, a claim that the universe was missing a day. That they were missing a day in time, and supposedly NASA scientists back in the 60s or something are supposed to have run these enormously vast calculations trying to get everything pinned down. I mean, it all sounds very scientific, and they found that there were two places that they couldn't account for. And the first of them was identified as that battle of Joshua that Joshua is supposed to have had against the Canaanites, where the sun stood still for almost a whole day. And then the other fraction is supposed to be a reference to this passage. I mean, it's an urban legend. You can look it up on Snopes. Nobody has ever heard of the scientists who were supposed to have done it. They probably wouldn't have had the computing capacity at the time. But that was the first time I came across this particular passage, and you occasionally still see it, because as we know, nothing ever goes away on the internet. But I want you to think a minute for what Hezekiah asks for. Do you want the shadow to go forward in time 10 steps on this staircase dial, or do you want the shadow to go backward 10? And Isaiah said, well, lengthening the shadow is easy. Pulling it backwards is hard. Make it go backwards. And that's a reasonable explanation as far as it goes. But have you ever noticed what happens almost invariably when people are uncertain of which way to go? Their future looks a bit unsettled. Do they want to go forward in time just a little bit, or do they want a do-over? Everybody wants a do-over.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've lost somebody, especially if you had any part in taking care of them, it is natural to ask yourself if there was anything else you could have done. And the answer is almost always no, and you know it, but that doesn't stop you from feeling that, for at least for a while. Believe me, I have recent experience. And you might remember the old song. Let's see, the version I became familiar with was from Anne Murray. Everything old is new again. Get out your white suit, your top hat and tails, put it in backwards when forward fails. I mean, that's just a natural stress reaction. We have all done it one time or another. We know we shouldn't, especially as we get older. We know we shouldn't. That doesn't stop us, at least having that initial reaction. For the last hymn, I nearly chose God of Grace and God of Glory, except that we'd recently done that one. Grant us wisdom, grant us courage for the living of these days. It takes courage, it takes grit to go forward. But I remember something that the father of the present Queen of England is supposed to have been fond of. It's from a poem about standing at the gate of the year and saying to the man who keeps it, "Give me a light that I may go forward into the darkness," and getting the response, "Put your hand in the hand of Jesus, and that will be better to you than any light and safer than a known way." And in this country, we need this advice right now. I mean, we have one political party that wants to turn the clock back 1 year. because they figure it will turn the clock back 50 or 100 years or more. And the other one wants to go back 5 years to when things were normal. The last time I talked to you, I talked about redemption doesn't make everything the way that it was magically. It just doesn't do it. It starts with where you are and enables you to go forward. I mean, what you've had to leave behind, you'll remember what that is. But you're given the heart to go on. So as we settle into the silence, let us listen for the still small voice, the same one that came to Elijah on Mount Horeb and gave him the heart to go on, to go forward into the future. And not, as the theologian Walter Brueggemann once said, in fact he said it when I was attending a lecture that he gave when he was in Greensboro, not to be like the guy who came and asked him, "Where did my world go?" We're not meant to stay in the book of Lamentations, even though Lamentations apparently is coming back into fashion at present. We're meant to go forward. We're an Easter people. We know there's an Easter after Good Friday.